Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking with author Aasaf Gavron about his new book, The Hilltop. He's joining us on the program as a publisher of 5 novels, including Ice, Moving, Almost Dead, Hydromania, and most recently, The Hilltop. This most recent literary work is considered to be one of those great works in Israeli society, and he's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program to talk with us about his book, The Hilltop. Aasaf, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Now, tell us how this book came about for you.
Well, I was always fascinated by the settlers, by the settlements. I am not one of them. I'm from the other camp, so to speak, in Israel. I live in Tel Aviv. I'm a writer. In my political opinions, I'm more on the left. But the settlers have been fascinating for me for several reasons. First of all, it's one of the most contested and hottest point of contention between Israelis and Palestinians. One of the biggest obstacles for peace, and it's basically these people just living in an area in the West Bank, which is very I won't get into details, into complexities of what is it exactly, but it's not exactly part of Israel. It's occupied territories. Some of the area is ruled by the Israeli army, some of it by Palestinians. So all in all, it's a place with no clear borders and no clear laws. So it's a bit of a Wild West, where these people are conquering another hill and another a place to live, and all in this violent atmosphere. And for me, it just was a great setting for a novel, for fiction. Also, what they do influences me, my life. The fact that it is an obstacle for peace, it affects my day-to-day life, and also it resonates, politically all across Israeli society and to the world. So many reasons why I was interested there.
Aasaf, as I was reading, and I still have a good part of the book to go here because it was really quite a bit for me to grapple what was going on, but what started really to emerge in the experience of reading The Hilltop is I was reminded of a guest I had on the program a few years back. She wrote a book called Horfano. And what this was about basically a group of hippies here in the United States, and it was more of a memoir than a novel. And what was interesting is just before I had her on the program, for some strange reason, I decided to start watching the old Western John Wayne and Clint Eastwood movies. And what was fascinating about that is I was reading her book as it started to emerge that just like what you're writing here on The Hilltop is, these are people looking for a place to settle, to call their own. They're looking to live a lifestyle that's, completely uniquely theirs, and to be able to do that, much as what real hippies in the United States were trying to do was to live by the American doctrine, which is, in the pursuit of happiness. But you tend to have a lot of government and interference and so forth going on and dictating what that is exactly, and that's where the lines and the blurriness really get drawn. And I kind of wondered, if that's really what's going on over there, sort of call it an Israeli-Palestinian, perhaps hippie movement, and that's just a loose term, that how we perceive what's going on here in the United States through our news medium is sort of maybe off track. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a great comparison. There are many similarities there in this idea of a group of people trying to kind of make their own rules and are in ongoing conflict with the authorities, with the different authorities. Also, you might not know this, but there are hippie tendencies in some of the settlements. I mean, the settlements are varied. There are all kinds, there are all types of people there. But one of those types is He's definitely the hippie, and there's quite a lot of weed smoking and quite a lot of this kind of loose, easygoing way of living. So your comparison really hits the point. There are, of course, also differences. I think the main one being that it's the politics. It's a political statement. Another one is the religion, which does not, as far as I know, is not part of the hippie movement, and most settlers are religious. But I like the comparison. It's a good way to see it. Yeah.
Because, for instance, what I guess what I can allude to here is, as I was talking with her about this, I said, when you take a look at the idea that you can come to America, at least in the early years, as you were even alluding to, the Wild West, if you will, it was a matter of going out, finding land that, was you. It was something you could work, something you can claim as your own, and basically station yourself in your own lifestyle, that pursuit of happiness. But then all of a sudden you have these renegades that come along and they kind of blow the thing out of proportion. They get too caught up in the drug use and too caught up into the free spirit. They don't contribute much of anything, and the next thing you know, hippies are being labeled as these drug-induced fanatics that really have no purpose. Whereas when you take a look at, for instance, this, where you're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian, conflict over, land and so forth, most people would look at that because of the relationship to, for instance, 9/11. And, this has been going on for years, so they look at that as like war renegades and things like that. Do you see where I'm kind of going there?
Yes, I do. Again, the difference is that the settlers see it as, from a religious, ideological perspective. They say this land is ours because God has given it to us.
Right.
And we don't care that other people, in this case Palestinians, are living on this land. But again, it is similar in many ways, in that sense that they want to make their own rules. They believe that they're in a way above the law, that they're entitled to their style of life. And they're in this constant cat and mouse game or chase with the authorities. And also, you drew now another good point, which is this image that is the way they are perceived from the outside, and the way that some of them, the extremists of them, are become the face of the movement, when actually, in truth, there might be one part of this movement, but they do not represent the whole of the group.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think what's really fascinating too, as you write in the Hilltop, is that this is clearly a novel about two brothers. One who seems to be more of a traditionalist. He's tied to the land, to the culture, to the religious belief. And then you have the other who decides, he's out there looking for fame and fortune, sort of that maybe American ideal, if you will. He sets out, he comes back, realizes, well, it was a little tougher than I thought. Maybe I might want to give this another run for my money.
Yes, it's true. I mean, they are brothers, but they are very different from each other. And I think that in some ways they complement each other in being two kind of faces of Israelis. One is the more introvert, shy guy who finds his peace and quiet eventually in religion and in this settlement. And the other is, as you say, the more go-getter, achiever, even overachiever, you could say, who's trying to get the money and the fame and the girls and everything. And then, as you say, it does become a little too tough for him. He goes to eventually the United States. He becomes an investment banker in Wall Street, and then he runs into trouble and he needs to get away from the States. I'm not sure that it's coming to the settlement to his brother in order to give it another shot. He mainly runs away, and this is the only place he could run away to. Which again, if you think of those hippie settlements or these settlements, that's one of the things that they do offer. They accept people who need to get away for various different reasons from their previous lives.
Making an allusion, to John Wayne. There was a time I was watching a film of his, and he said something so poignant that I thought, I've been a person, for instance, in growing up, where I went to a different school every year, starting in preschool until the 6th grade. A different school.
Wow.
Some people go, for all the way through junior high in the same school, and then finally they go to high school and it's a different school. So the idea of moving around, against the idea of being settled, I kind of had a feel for this because you take a look at, for instance, the Jewish religious and the Zionistic upbringing is the idea that God has this promised land that's guaranteed, at least according to this belief. But yet they never seem to find it or get there, and when they feel they do, something gets disrupted and moves them off. That's pretty powerful stuff. And back to the John Wayne, he says, but there's home. I go out and I may do these runs, these cattle runs, whatever it is, but then I get to come back home. And there was a feeling when he said that, and I thought, I don't know that I've ever experienced that. And that must be tough for a Jewish community over the centuries to have that feeling like, when do we get to call a place that was promised to us home?
Yeah, there is this term, the wandering Jew. It's almost an inherent part of our culture, of our being. The John Wayne, and before earlier you mentioned the westerns that you watched just before you did that interview a couple years ago. There is this feeling of the Western, and actually in the cover of the Israeli edition, the original Hebrew edition of the book of the Hilltop, the designer used an old image of Clint Eastwood from one of his movies, and he kind of redrew it to make it look like a settler. But the basic features of that character on the cover of the book is actually Clint Eastwood. So, yeah.
We'll call yours the Clint Eastwood interview.
And this thing about wandering, it's very true. The kind of legend says that the Jews were wandering all over the world, and now they have their homeland. But actually, in truth, we are still wandering. It's for young Israelis, it's very common to travel around the world. Many Israelis still feel that they are not comfortable with Israel, with the way Israel is, and the direction it's taking at the moment. So Israelis and Jews are still kind of wandering around, and it is an interesting point, and it is definitely a theme in the novel through those two brothers, two characters, because they are moving around all the time. Eventually they're in the settlement, and this is where most of the book takes place. But we go back to their childhood and their different journeys to Tel Aviv, to America, and then back to Israel. So it's definitely a theme, I think, in Jewish and Israeli life and in this novel.
Well, and that's what I wanted people to understand, is because you can take a look at this and say, well, okay, this is about the Israeli-Palestinian, the land thing, and okay, well, there's religious beliefs, then there's political positions, but you don't tend to do that. There's a real humanness that comes through, that we make daily decisions maybe based on beliefs or moral values that we have, but at the end of the day, it's really about the pursuit of happiness and having something that really feels genuinely to be yours and part of your life.
Yeah, finding your identity. And I think that the fact that this book is translated to English and to several other languages, I think it shows that it's not an internal Israeli story. Okay, the background is the politics of Israel, and maybe a reader will pick it up in a bookstore and say, "Oh, I don't know anything about it," and so I'm not interested. But actually, as you say, it's not about this background. The background is part of the story, of course, and for me it's interesting and fascinating, but it is about people and about the relations and their journeys in life and their search for identity and their search for peace and quiet, and for themselves, for who they are in the world. Definitely.
I like the part of the book where you were talking about how they were going about producing that super virgin olive oil, and that's where sort of the Hilltop kind of comes into place in the description where here was this beautiful hill out among this vast flat landscape, and it reminded a person of a woman's breast. And
Yeah.
I suppose somebody who finds that place that they call theirs, that would probably be the feeling they would have, like, this is the place where I could be nurtured, I can grow, and I can live, and I can pursue my happiness, for instance.
Yeah, and there's something sensual about the landscape and about the relations of the people to it. It's all about the land. It's all about the connection to the land, and of course that's the contest of the Israelis and the Palestinians, who both feel very connected to the land, and it's almost on the verge sometimes of sexual, of being part of it and liking it as almost as a man likes a woman. And actually, this comment about this specific hill in the West Bank that resembles the breast of a woman was made by a historian 2,000 years ago, a Roman historian, Josephus Flavius. He was very famous in the area and in documenting the different rise and falls of the Roman Empire in the region, and he was the one who coined this term, that this little hill reminded him of a breast.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's also fascinating, again, did you know these people? Does this novel actually come from direct experiences you've had with people?
I didn't grow up knowing them.
Okay.
But once I made the decision to write about it, once I decided, this is something I want to explore, and as I described, I think in the very first question, why I was drawn to this subject, then I went out and researched, and I tend to do long and deep researches for my novels, and I tend to pick up subjects that are interesting for me, but I not necessarily, come from within them. So I needed to go out and travel, and I went out to the West Bank, and I traveled extensively for a couple of years, and I ended up going back mainly to this one settlement that became the inspiration for the settlement in the book, and there I started meeting the people, and talking to them, and kind of absorbing the atmosphere, walking, seeing the landscape, reading their newspapers, their materials. So there was a lot of research involved in that, and I needed to go out there and meet the people and see who they are, beyond the stereotype that each of us has about a group of people. I knew that I can go deeper and kind of decipher their code.
Mm-hmm. I know that longing is one of the big things that you talk about, too, that each and every one of us have that within us, but sometimes a longing that doesn't become realized can actually cause a person to become broken.
Yeah, there's longing on it's a good point. There's longing on several levels in the book. There is the romantic longing of just to be with someone who you see as your your twin soul, And there is the longing to the land that is very strong that we talked about earlier, and there is this kind of longing for connection, whether it's with a brother or your missing parents. In the case of our two heroes who are orphans, and their parents were killed in a car accident when they were very small, and there is this also longing for the person who is not there anymore. And the parents are one example, but also for Gabi, for one of the heroes, it's his son, that for different reasons that I don't think we get into now, but are well described in the book, he is not allowed to be in touch with his son. And another character there, a female character, Shaulit, who Gabi and she develop a kind of a friendship or a falling in love kind of way. She lost her father in a terrorist attack, so she has her kind of longing. So you're right, longing and longings, if you could say it in plural, are definitely there, all around and all through the novel.
Mm-hmm. Now, Aasaf, I thought that was an important point to bring up about longing, because I think that when people here in the United States, again, after 9/11, we kind of have this belief about what we think Middle Eastern people are like, especially when you see the conflicts, in Israel and Palestine, especially this most recent situation in Gaza. And I have actually interviewed guests over the years since that time, and it's been fascinating, some of the perspectives that I've gotten that made me realize, well, that could just as easily be happening here in America, and in some cases it does. But when we think of longing, and you think of, for instance, the wandering Jews, as you mentioned earlier, and the idea of broken families, in the case here with these two central characters, longing to know who their parents were. Yeah. And the thing is, when you think of extremists, this jihad that we hear about, they tend to recruit boys that are in those situations. They're longing for a place to belong, So emotionally speaking, they're not of a strong enough spirit or mind to be able to make those decisions, to realize somebody's bringing me into the loop of this situation here. I'm being accepted, so that's good. But then they can't rationalize, but what they're asking me to do is going to cause some tremendous harm, to other people that I wouldn't normally have a problem with. And I think when we look at that as a representation, that it's pretty difficult to understand sometimes until you see the whole picture as you're describing here in the Hilltop, that yeah, there's some bad people, there's some good people, but we all have that propensity within us, depending on what tilts us to be motivated one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and the process you describe is true with this, kind of making use of or taking advantage of these lost souls who have no connection and no home really, and then they are offered this home and this acceptance that they don't get anywhere else, with groups who maybe then use that for their own good and for negative ideas. Also something else that is part of it is religion. Religion justifies a lot. It justifies even this idea of killing. Of course, usually it's not a strict way to explain religion, but people can manipulate it in a way so those lost kids believe it, and believe that if they will take their own lives together with 100 other lives, they will, or 1,000, if it's 9/11 or more, then they will go to heaven, or they will bring justice to their people, or whatever they believe in. Actually, my previous novel that was translated into English and was published 4 years ago, Almost Dead, was more about that. It was about the period of the Second Intifada in Israel and the phenomenon of the suicide bombings. In Israel, they started in the 90s and reached a kind of a peak in the early 2000s, about 10 or 12 years ago. And one of the characters in that novel is a suicide bomber or a member of a terrorist group, and that was really my interest in that book, to really go inside this mind and try to understand where it's coming from. How does a guy choose this horrific route? Who convinces him to do that, and how does it happen? And I do think that in America, people kind of woke up on that day, on 9/11, and they didn't realize that such a thing was even possible, and they started thinking, why should people do that? And in that book, Almost Dead, and I think in a way in the Hilltop as well, I'm definitely exploring this through the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Mm-hmm. And it's just, as you so eloquently put it, it's a matter of, that moment in someone's life. They could be pushed either way, as they say. Every man has a breaking point. The question is, when will that happen, and what are the circumstances that cause that?
Yeah, and who is next to him?
Right.
Yeah, and who exactly is next to him at that point and offers him a solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just such a fascinating thing to explore, because there'll be times I'll listen to people and they'll say, they're just a bunch of desert wackos, and it's like, really, do you even know what it's like to live over there? What the customs and traditions are? Do you really believe they all feel this way? And I would say no. You can go to any city in America, and really, if you live in it long enough, if you wander around long enough, you won't see much of a difference between there and what's going on over in the East.
Yeah, I think it's the easy answer to say, oh, they are just wackos, or they're just animals. In Israel, many people say that. They're just animals.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, they are not animals, They are human beings, and they chose to behave in this way for reasons. Of course, we do not support and agree in this, but I think we should try to understand where it's coming from in order to deal with it. I think it's very easy to say they're just wackos or animals, or however people put it, because then you're just ignoring the problem, and you're not trying to see where it comes from, and maybe to solve it on that side, on that point where they are convinced to do that.
Well, I think too the fear is when somebody takes that stance, is they realize there's a possibility they can become that, and that's what scares them most.
Yeah, it's true, and fear is the word, because many times by inducing fear and by going on and on and on about it, and about threats, and about the other, just wanting to destroy us and to kill us, then you use this as a tool to enhance those hatred feelings in people, and again to push them into places that no normal, as we see it, person would go.
Well, I want to thank you, Aasaf, for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program to talk about your book, The Hilltop. It's always a pleasure to welcome in a worldview where, as you said, you spent time there, you were involved and enmeshed in the culture to get a feel for it, so that you could put it in and add the humanity that really exists, so that we have a better understanding, that sometimes I see the enemy and it is me, and that really is a lot of reality, that we all have the capacity to maybe turn in that direction, but more importantly, we also have the capacity to love, to share, and to, pursue happiness, and that's what a lot of it's really about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I will always choose, even if someone is on the other camp or the other side, or what some people would term my enemy, I would always choose to learn to know him or her, and to develop some kind of empathy in order to understand where their decisions and actions come from. And I don't have to agree with them, and I don't have to like them, but I think that understanding is very important. Understanding others is very important also to understanding yourself, and find your own way and pursue your happiness in life.
And a good way to say that, too, is, I really don't like eating liver, but I have great friends who love it. Awesome. Thank you for joining us on the program. I was going to ask you, do you have a website our listeners can go to? Yes,
it's aasafgavron.com. That's my name, ASSAFGAVRON.com. You can also find me on Facebook if you search my name, and on it you can find information on the novel, on the Hilltop, and anything. I'll be traveling in the States in the spring, so you can check if I'm in your area, and You can see all the information there, aasafgavron.com.
Well, very good, and I'll look forward to finishing the book, definitely. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Again, the book is The Hilltop. Our guest today, Aasaf Gavron, and you can find him at aasafgavron.com. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.